a Dear Laura for you that kind of ties into what we were just talking about. This one says, Dear Laura, thank you for taking the time to read this. I'm writing to you about a legal case of blatant racial injustice against a black man named Christopher Kearney. If there is not a drastic intervention, another innocent black man will spend his life in prison. I am not sure why the prosecution/police are so intent on putting a murder charge on Chris. And then parenthetically she says, I have my own theories. But it is quite evident that they are doing everything in their power to keep Chris in jail and convict him. His bail was set so high that he had to spend the last 19 months in jail instead of continuing to work, raise his children, and be a husband. Although we were trying to avoid crowdfunding, right now we can't afford to hire an attorney, and a case like this costs anywhere from $90,000 to $150,000. This is hard, scary, lonely, and infuriating, but we're not giving up.
Yes, this is my understanding of the case from what you sent to me, is that this is a guy who had a history of some involvement in gangs.
Yes.
And there's all kinds of laws, by the way, on the books that give police extraordinary powers to deal with gangs. Because of, again, we were gripped in fear in the 80s and 90s of the way that we thought gangs were propagating in our ghettos and in prisons.
Mm-hmm.
So we adopted all these very draconian laws to deal with them. But yes, what it appears now is his first trial ended in a mistrial. Is that correct?
Yes.
But he's still in jail, pending the second trial, pending whether the prosecutor will go ahead with a second case.
Yes.
In what sounds like a very shaky case to begin with.
Right.
And the thing is, though, that's another thing, though, that the media has done a bad job presenting. We act like cases are slam dunks. They're never slam dunks. No, they're just not. So you can understand why a prosecutor would go forward at something that wasn't a slam dunk, especially when it involves gangs, because again they're given extraordinary leeway in those situations. This is unusual because he hasn't yet been convicted. Right. Usually, like the undisclosed folks, go into it once there's been a wrongful conviction. He's
just being held.
He's just being held. Yeah. That's another thing. As I said, we hold people. In that case, it's a murder. So a judge could certainly rationalize it. I'm saying I'm holding somebody because if they are released and commit another murder, I'm toast.
Right.
But in the meantime, he's not getting any kind of a fair shake. Right. He's sitting in jail just waiting.
Yeah. He has a doggy daycare business.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He and his wife and their 2 kids, and
And how how does his family survive in that situation?
Right.
Another huge issue that the justice system is dealing with is just delays. There's all kinds of laws on the books saying that people have to get dealt with within certain time frames, and they're just ignored.
Isn't that in the Constitution?
There's a right to a speedy trial, but what's speedy is unfortunately is the
they didn't
question.
Define that, huh?
There was that recent case that went before the Supreme Court that thankfully the Supreme Court actually overturned, which was a bit of a surprise to me, of that guy who's had 6 mistrials. He's been in jail for 40 years.
Oh.
Curtis Flowers.
Yes.
The wonderful podcast about that. And I believe it's In the Dark is the podcast about it. There are 2 seasons of In the Dark that are both wonderful. But that was a case where he kept the DA kept disallowing black jurors from his jury. And it would go to the appeals court, and they would say, "You're disallowing black jurors clearly here," and it would end in a mistrial. And they just kept him in prison, and he's been tried over and over and over, and it keeps ending in a mistrial because this DA keeps doing it, and the DA just got reelected again because nobody ran against him. It's a small town, there just isn't a robust political establishment there, unfortunately. But thankfully, as I said, the Supreme Court actually did the right thing, which I was very thrilled about. And actually, today we're waiting for Adnan Syed's case was just submitted to the Supreme Court yesterday, and we'll hear on Monday whether they will grant cert, which means whether they will allow it to. The odds are against them granting cert, but. The appeals court in Maryland made an egregious ruling, a really awful ruling that actually would affect thousands of other cases if it's allowed to stand. So we're hoping that Supreme Court will see the merit in overturning it, because it's a ridiculous ruling.
Do you believe he's innocent?
Adnan Syed?
Yes.
Yeah, he's innocent.
And do you think you know who did it?
I don't. No, there was some very very suspicious things that were directed at another
Yes.
Part of him and Lee's life. Some of those have been looked into further.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want to point a finger at somebody. I'm not law enforcement. I think it deserves further investigation.
Right.
But I don't believe it was Adnan Syed.
Okay.